From the Hill, Trump, Soros' son should be charged under racketeering law.
There you go.
And I'll just go directly to the source. This is the truth heard round the world yesterday. Oh, sorry. We have the, right here. At Real Donald Trump. George Soros and his wonderful radical left son should be charged with RICO because of their support of violent protests and much more all throughout the United States of America. We're not going to allow these lunatics to rip apart America anymore, never giving it so much as a chance to breathe and be free. Soros and his group of psychopaths have caused great damage to our country. That includes his crazy West Coast friends. Be careful. We're watching you. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
I love the sign.
I've got a lot of thoughts on this, but let me pass around the table.
Well, I love it. I think it's brilliant. Look, they've been funding, if not directly, at least indirectly, all of the groups that pay people to attend these protests that inevitably turn into riots. And he also funds all of the prosecutors who let the people out of jail. So it really is literally a racket.
Yes.
Yeah. The fact that George Soros, the phrase a Soros prosecutor or Soros DA is something that's so well known throughout the United States is a massive problem. George Soros has been doing all that he can to fund far left-leaning DAs and prosecutors that release criminals back into society. You can have all the law enforcement you want in a city. You can have umpteen $1 million, whatever, when it comes to law enforcement. But if the judges and the district attorneys don't prosecute and put these criminals away, it doesn't matter. And like we've seen in D.C., the amount of people that you actually have to take off the street to radically change the crime statistics, it's not a lot. The police know the people that are committing these crimes. They can usually call them out by name. Especially when you're talking about beat cops. Yeah. They know who's out there committing the crimes. All you have to do is pick these guys up and put them in jail for an extended period of time, and the murder rates go down. The crime rates go down. And that's something that the populations of these cities want desperately. And it's people like George Soros and left-wing financiers or whatever, they're the ones that make these cities unsafe because they are the ones that make sure that DAs that won't prosecute crime are elected. They're the ones that dump tons of money into these people's campaigns. This is a problem that is fixable if we were to go after the people that are dumping money into these campaigns.
It was just a couple of years ago, I think in 2023, that the DC police chief at the time, Robert Conti, said that the average homicide suspect had 11 priors in DC. So you're absolutely right. It's the same people committing crime over and over again. And DC obviously has a specific problem with youth offenders, which is almost directly because of the DC City Council passing criminal justice reform for the worst of the worst and downgrading charges and letting them back out on the streets. But yeah, it's the same groups of people over and over again.
Yeah.
Right. Now, specifically, I mean, there's so many elements of corruption in the Soros Inc. story. One of the things that there's the RICO charge is obviously this kind of organized crime network. It's a very powerful weapon. It's a very big, heavy artillery weapon to use. And the part of the issue is that the way the Soros machine works is that it's done through these philanthropic 501c3 fronts, and it's heavily lawyered up in order to basically use loopholes in the tax system, to use loopholes in the political influence machinery. But the Soros world really trades on national security secrets. I believe the best way to understand the Open Society Institute, the Open Society Foundations, is to look at it how we look at Harvard. Many people say that Harvard is a hedge fund with a university attached because it's a $56 billion endowment. And then you have the university, which is just a pittance compared to that in terms of what it actually requires in maintenance. It gets $9 billion in federal grants. Much of that has been cut by the Trump administration. But then Harvard, their institutes and their centers, they go out and they take the actions that actually help the investments of the hedge fund, the Harvard Endowment, the Harvard Management Company. And so we saw this in the 1990s when Harvard was tasked by USAID, given actually hundreds of millions of dollars in USAID money, to reorganize the economy of Russia, while the Harvard endowment was investing in these Russian oil industries and steel industries. And so they were setting the policy inside Russia while profiting off of it. But and I do think that there needs to be an interrogation of the role of insider trading on national security secrets. Right now, there's a lot of attention on the Nancy Pelosi stock trader side of things, where you will invest, members of Congress will have insider knowledge about a bill that will affect a business, and they will invest in the stock market to bet on the rise and fall of companies well before the market does. Well, the way Soros and many of these other big kind of oligarch sort of hedge fund / philanthropy people work is they work with the State Department, USAID, NATO. Their institutions serve as fronts for them, and then the hedge fund bets on those operations that they're facilitating. So the Open Society Institute will operate with the State Department in Mongolia to make sure that we get the rights to a copper or gold mine. But then the Soros hedge fund will invest in the company that they are working with the CIA and the State Department, the USAID to get the rights to. They'll do the same thing in Eastern Europe. They'll do the same thing in South America. And I believe that there needs to be a full review of the Open Society Foundation security clearance possession. Just this week, Tulsi Gabbard, I believe this is actually just yesterday, this is from the Wall Street Journal, Tulsi Gabbard blindsided CIA over revoking clearance of undercover officer. And this relates to, I think, something like 37 people had their security clearances cut along this, the Wall Street Journal says this blindsided the CIA. Tulsi obviously is the head of the intelligence community. But how many people at the Open Society Institute have security clearances? Why has that not been reviewed? What was just broke 2 weeks ago was actually this incredible revelation from 2016 at the very start of Russiagate. In July 2016, Tulsi and the FBI declassified an annex that has been classified for years relating to intelligence from the very origins of Russiagate. And it started off essentially with a plot between Hillary Clinton and George Soros. And I'll read here from the actual annex itself, which was released by Chuck Grassley. And this related to the George Soros Eurasia Center, the nonprofit's Open Society Foundation, and Leonard Bernardo, who was the regional director for Eurasia at the Open Society Foundation, as well as Jeff Goldstein there. And what they publish is this incredible section in here, and folks can see it. I'm not sure if we can Control F in here, but there was a section that said that Hillary Clinton had just approved a plan from her foreign policy advisor to set Trump up to make it look like he was backed by the Russians, that the FBI would come and pour oil on it later, that CrowdStrike would do the media, that we'd come up with some reason like our critical infrastructure is under attack. And this was an email purportedly from Leonard Bernardo, the head of the Open Society Institute Foundation for Eurasia. So somehow George Soros' Open Society Institute knew that Hillary Clinton had approved this false flag plan to set up Trump, knew that the FBI was in on it, knew that CrowdStrike was in on it to fake digital forensics and argue that Russia had hacked the DNC server. And so how did the Soros Institute know these deep details about the Hillary Clinton campaign to do this plot? Well, we know that they were meeting with the State Department when Hillary Clinton was I'm going to pull this up on screen here. When she was the Secretary of State, this was, I'll put who was in the room. So we know that Hillary Clinton met with George Soros personally at the State Department, and they brought along with them the very people who turned up in the classified annex. Jeff Goldstein, the head of the senior policy advisor for Eurasia, who was named in the FBI in the classified annex here. Does Jeffrey L. Epstein have a security clearance? Does Leonard Bernardo how many other people, and I believe we need a full accounting, the same way we publish the JFK files, the MLK files, the Russiagate files. We need all USAID files, all CIA analyst memos that mention the Open Society Institute. Let's put on display for the world the full extent of U.S. government involvement in this. And I have one more thing to say about that, but what are you guys' thoughts on what I laid out?
Well, this is pretty much all of the former NatSec officials or IC officials who are on the left wing, which is that they trade in secrets, whether it's leaking things to mainstream media or after they leave service. I use that term very loosely, after they leave the government, getting these massive media contracts where they're basically paid to go on and speak with an air of authority about things of which they're not privy to anymore, like the 51 officials who signed the letter claiming that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. Like, they didn't have any special secret knowledge about that, but they were using the guise of, we have security clearances and we worked in the intelligence community in order to try to provide veracity to that claim. Clapper, Brennan, all of these people had developed these relationships with the media so that they could secure these six-figure contributor contracts by, well, what do we think they were doing while they were in government? They were giving them access to information that they otherwise wouldn't have had access to. And actually, this is pretty much exactly what John Bolton is accused of doing, right? Mm-hmm. Of keeping classified documents or emailing them to himself so he could use them for a book deal so that he could write a memoir about his time in the Trump administration.
And John Bolton, interestingly, was the head of policy and budget for USAID under Ronald Reagan in the 1990s, right when George Soros started out the Open Society Foundation and partnered with USAID during the Cold War. So this was this left-hand, right-hand alliance that George Soros rode.
40 or 50 years, at least.
Right.
And Mike, you were talking earlier about how USAID is often actually inflating the problem that they're supposedly trying to solve, and how there's going to be so much revisionist history about what they were actually doing if the files aren't released. And I mean, just to provide another example of that, during the AIDS epidemic in the 80s and 90s, the revisionist history is that the U.S. government and Ronald Reagan specifically were homophobic, and that's why the epidemic was able to get so out of control. It's actually precisely the opposite. If you read Marty McCary's book that he released, I think it was 2 summers ago. I apologize, I can't recall the name, but you can Google it. He talks about how they were stopped from prohibiting gay men at that time from donating blood because it would be viewed as homophobic. And what happened was a whole bunch of people who required regular blood transplants for various diseases or for whatever reason, that they were getting infected blood because they had no prohibition on gay people donating blood. In fact, they couldn't even ask them about their sexual activities. So you had a bunch of gay men, specifically in Los Angeles, who had been very promiscuous or were prostitutes themselves, going in to donate blood for drug money or for rent money or whatever it was. And the government basically were like, well, we can't tell them to stop because we would get accused of homophobia. So actually, by doing the opposite of what they accused them of, not being homophobic, they made the problem so much worse.
The accusation of bigotry has been incredibly detrimental to our society because it's been used against people so many times when they bring up legitimate concerns. And just this particular one, as an example, but the accusation of, oh, you're just mean. Mm-hmm. You just have a hateful opinion has done significant damage to the United States.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.